Hospitality Meets is brought to you by RotaCloud, the simple workforce management software for hospitality teams. RotaCloud lets you create and share rotas, record attendance, and manage your team's annual leave, all in less time than it takes to make a brew. It can also make life easier for your staff, allowing them to check their rotas, request holiday, and even pick up extra shifts, all through the RotaCloud mobile app. Start your 30-day free trial today by visiting rotacloud.com/Phil and find out how much easier managing your team can be. Welcome to Hospitality Meets with me, Phil Street, where each week we take a light-hearted look into the stories and individuals that make up the wonderful world of hospitality. Today's guest is Martin Traynor OBE, Chairman of the Institute of Hospitality. Coming up on today's show, Martin is headline news.
The 6 o'clock news reporting on a meeting that I was actually at.
Phil has lofty ambitions. I'm just going to go straight for knighthood. And Martin recounts a particularly hairy moment.
And I'll tell you what, that's probably the longest half an hour in my life.
All that and so much more as we chat through Martin's quite amazing career journey so far. Martin has had a magnificent career to this point, taking him through hotels and on into parliamentary positions. We open the book on all of that, and he's got some great stories from his life. So please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I hope you enjoy. And a huge Hospitality Meets welcome to Martin Traynor OBE. I had to throw that in.
Yes, thank you very much, Phil. Yes, delighted to join you this morning.
Yes, absolutely. How's life?
Yeah, pretty good at the moment. As I said, we're just coming back from the Christmas break, so all ready now for the new year and see what challenges that will bring.
Well, I'm sure 2025 has got no challenges in front of it. It's going to be lovely and glorious and easy and all of those things, if only.
The ultimate optimism.
Yes, or what's naivety? Maybe is it's maybe the other one. But in any case, where do we find you today?
Well, I'm at home today. Ironically, snowed in. We've had an incredible snowfall last night, so yes, won't be going out today. So in my front room.
Very good. Well, a nice day to record a podcast. Then you can't really go out and do anything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For context, we are recording this on the 6th of January, and as we were just discussing before we switched the microphone on, the minute there's a flurry of snow, that's it. Everything just stops.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Yes, absolutely. But in any case, well, I suppose let's just get to this then and take us all the way back. How did you get into hospitality? Actually, what are you doing now, Martin? That's probably a better way to start.
Well, at the moment, I'm doing a mixture of things, which includes chair of the Institute of Hospitality, but I'm also doing some other stuff where I'm chairing Loughborough Town Deal, which is delivering levelling up funding for the town of Loughborough, where I live just outside. And we're delivering something in the region of £40 million worth of projects there. So that's keeping me quite busy. I also chair the Leicester and Rutland Community Council. That's a charity that's been around now for 100 years, supporting people in rural communities. So those are the sort of things I'm involved in at the moment.
Right. Well, I think when we had a chat once upon a time, I think you said that you're about to retire, but it sounds like you're busier than ever.
Well, I often laugh with people. I said I am doing less, but I still don't relish the thought of sitting at home watching daytime television or having my wife hoover around me. So I'm going to keep busy.
Yeah, quite right. Right. So yes, let's go back to that original question I asked. Take us all the way back. How did you get into hospitality in the first place?
Well, it is as with many people. I think I probably drifted into it. You know, I was sat there at the age of 18, had 4 A levels. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I didn't really know whether I was going to go to university, and I ended up working in the bar of a local hotel. And as ever, you get the bug. And I really, really enjoyed working in the hospitality sector. So I ended up going to college in Cardiff for 3 years to get my HND in hospitality and institutional management. Sounds a grand title.
Yeah.
So, and then off to work in the hotel industry. So I spent the next 22 years in and around hotels. I worked in London. I did Carlisle, Gloucester, Basingstoke. So I did quite a variety of different hotels. The last hotel I managed was the Grand in Leicester, which I left there in 2001. one, and that was to take up a different role, which was the chief executive of Leicestershire Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So that was a shift. But again, it was something that I'd always been interested in, and I had served as president of the chamber, so I did have an experience in it and understood it. So I spent the next sort of 14 years representing the business community here in Leicester and Leicestershire, a job to which I thoroughly enjoyed. But we got to a stage where we decided to merge the Leicestershire Chamber with Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire to create the East Midlands Chambers of Commerce. So, but it was always my sort of intention by then to finish and to do something else. So I drifted into what's described as portfolio career. So I ended up as deputy chairman of the hospitals here in Leicester, which is, just to give you an example of the size of it, it's employed 16,000 people, £1 billion a year turnover. So it was a big operation. So I ended up there as deputy chairman. I ended up going to work for the Department of Business on the Regulatory Policy Committee, because when David Cameron took office in 2010, they did a review of regulations in the UK. And we found that there were 21,000 regulations that govern day-to-day life. So this was a bit of an impetus from government to look at these things and say, well, actually, how can we reduce the regulatory burden? So I spent 6 years over at the Department of Business working on this particular deregulation agenda. I did my 2-3 year terms, so I thought that's probably the end of my public service. But somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, have you seen this job over at the Cabinet Office? And it was a very, very grand title of the Small Business Crown Representative. Now, I would always describe...
Very grand title.
Oh, it is. And I always say I would never describe it as an overly powerful position, but it always got you a good table in a restaurant.
Yeah.
So I was invited to apply for this because they said, well, based on your experience, we actually think that you could do a good job for us. So 70 people applied. I think they interviewed 10 of us, and I was pleased to be appointed to the role. So it was quite a change, actually, because you spend your life, or certainly my time at the Chamber of Commerce, trying to represent the interests of business and everything else, and then suddenly you're in the centre of government with the ability to influence some of those things. So it was quite a fascinating change. And as you could imagine, over the last, so I finished in March last year, but as you can imagine, over that 5 year period, it was quite interesting to see government firsthand and some of the challenges of COVID and everything else that went on during that 5 year period. So quite an interesting part of my life, and to which I enjoyed. And I like to think during that 5 years, I did make a difference. And as you can imagine, when COVID came, anybody that had small business in their job title, it came in from everywhere, from government departments, external, just trying to help businesses through what was a very, very difficult period. So, and I think, people often berate civil servants, but I could tell you a lot of us worked 7 days a week during COVID, just trying to, one, keep the show on the road, but also to help a lot of businesses that were struggling.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, especially as I always used to look at my mother and father getting irate at politicians when I was a younger man, and I kind of feel myself going there more frequently myself. But the thing that you always have to remember, one, you can't keep everybody happy, right? Somebody's going to be unhappy with anything that you do. But two, it's a thankless job. And, if you have a look in the mirror a lot of the time, would you... the vast majority of people, I think, would look at it and go, that's not for me. That's not for me. So it's very easy to throw stones into glass houses when you're not in there yourself.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And having seen, up front, some of these ministerial posts are bloody hard going. A cabinet minister's diary is managed from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night in 15-minute slots. And when said minister goes home at 10 o'clock from wherever they've been, whether it's a social event or whatever, they're then expected to do another couple of hours reading the red box ready for tomorrow morning. Those are tough jobs. And, often, you have to make some very, very difficult decisions. And, without making any sort of political point, whoever's in office, it's a tough role, and you move. The whole thing about this agenda, it moves so quickly, as does the news cycle. But I can recall during COVID some of the things we had to do, and it was very much on the basis the minister would make an announcement on the Monday. On the Tuesday, we're trying to knot together the policy, and by Thursday, we had to have an implementation plan. Well, that's all the wrong way round, but we had to move very quickly to get support out there to businesses, and and sometimes that's what's required. And a lot of people burnt the midnight oil to get there.
Yeah, well, and the thing you always have to remember as well, I certainly have come to realize this is that a lot of the time the stuff that just gets reported in the news is just a focus on the negativity. It's a
Yeah,
focus on look at what they did wrong rather
yeah,
than anything about what they've done right. And they might do 10 things in a day, and the one thing that
yeah.
annoys people will be the thing that will make headlines, and it will be the not the other 9 things that have progressed something along.
Yeah, I think that's a fair reflection, and I can recall listening to the 6 o'clock news reporting on a meeting that I was actually at, and it bear no reflection to what we discussed.
Right.
But that's the nature of it. But you just have to get on with it. And I think politicians do get bad press, but there's a lot of people out there very dedicated, and they've come into politics to make a difference, not to make people's lives poorer.
Yeah. Indeed. And, I think the other thing is that, and this is something that has been leveled at me in the past because my world is recruitment and everybody, there used to be this thing. Somebody asked me the question once, what's worse, a recruiter or a real estate agent? And I remember thinking to myself, well, ultimately, I think any sector has those that care deeply about what they do and those who don't. And
Yeah.
politics has got to be no different. There's got to be people who go in it for their own self gain, but there's also a lot of people who go in it for all the right reasons, which is to make a difference and to try and improve the world in some way.
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
and so, yeah, I would imagine that politics can't be any different than any other sector in that regard.
No, Phil, I think that's right, and I always laugh at Kevin Hollinrake, who used to be the small business minister that I worked very closely with. And before he came into politics, he owned an estate agency or a large estate agency, and he always said he came into politics to improve his social standing.
Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely blitzed through your career. We have to go back and cover
Yeah,
off some stuff. I just want to focus a little bit on your time in hotels.
yeah.
How did you kind of climb the ladder? And before you moved into the Chamber of Commerce role, what was the role you're doing? My assumption is general manager, but how did you actually get there?
Yeah, it's a funny one, and I think certainly when I came out of college and went into it, I think the ability to, should we say, be flexible, move, etc., and I think I came to Leicestershire here in 1990, but before that, I'd probably moved 4 times in 3 years, but each time I got promoted because from assistant food and beverage manager to food and beverage manager to deputy manager to general manager. So, and I think I was general manager of what was called the Newton Park Hotel just outside Burton-on-Trent. I then came to Loughborough to manage the King's Head Hotel, and then I moved to the Grand Hotel in Leicester as general manager. So, it's the old sort of thing. In those days, it was very much about flexibility, moving when the post came up, and I think, as I was saying before, I'd moved from sort of London up to Carlisle, and then Carlisle down to Gloucester, and then over to Burton-on-Trent. So that's quite a movement around the country. But of course, as always, in those days, it was a little bit easier because you're young and you're single, so you can live out of a case.
Yeah. No, indeed.
But
But you kind of, I suppose it's a wonderful element to the industry, and if you are willing to be transient,
yeah,
you can go where the opportunity is, I suppose,
yeah.
rather than just taking what appears on your doorstep, as it were. It's a global industry in that respect.
It is, and looking back, I probably would have one regret that I didn't take up the opportunities of working overseas. But silly because I'd only sort of based my career here in the UK. But I think if I had my time back again, I would most definitely head and do an appointment overseas.
Right. Yeah, but well, it worked out all right in the end.
Yes. Well, they say most people now will have 3 different careers, and I suspect I've probably fallen into that category. But one of the big things I'm pushing for is to try to get to a situation where people recognise the industry as a genuine career.
Yeah.
Okay, I did 22 years in it and then moved and did something else. But it is, and often, when you talk to people, they think about hospitality as something you do either in a gap year or while you're doing your degree. We need to try and shift that image to actually it is a bona fide career, and there are
Yeah.
huge amounts of opportunities right across the hospitality sector. But that's very much my mission here at the institute, to try and help change that particular image. And again, it's not necessarily changing the image amongst young people that are coming through education now. It's often changing the image mum and dad have of what
Yeah.
hospitality is about. If I recall, when I was growing up, it was still probably the upstairs, downstairs view of hospitality, as opposed to now, oh, this is something you do in a gap year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, equally, if you look at how far the industry has come in the last, even 10 years, but if we expand that to 20 years, it's an unrecognizable industry from what it was back then in terms of the professionalism that
Yeah,
is, the level of capability in the industry in this country now is comparable with anywhere in the world in terms of the sorts of places that you can go and experience hospitality. And so,
yeah,
I completely agree with you. I think I've spoken about this so many times on the show around the fact that the issue, as you said, doesn't rest in inspiring kids into come into. I think we can do that fairly easily. In
yeah,
fact, it's about inspiring their parents to believe that actually, if they go into this industry, they're going to be, one, really well looked after, and two, can forge a properly serious career
yeah.
whilst having a bloody good time while you're at it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. But I think the issue we often come across is the parental view of life. And again, it's a similar sort of thing. If you talk to people, say in engineering, they talk about careers in engineering, etc., etc. But mum and dad's perception is man in overall with spanner and oily rag. Well, to be honest with you, the vast majority now isn't. It's pretty high tech stuff. Well,
Yeah.
when I was running the Chamber of Commerce, I visited Caterpillar at Desford. And they had three video conference rooms, 24-hour use with engineers designing things. That isn't necessarily man with spanner and oily rag. Okay, there are people out there who will be doing that ultimately, but it's very, very different. And again, it also applies actually now to the way we run hotels, especially large hotels. That IT is an important part of what we do. And it was interesting. I had the occasion to book the Rotary Christmas lunch this year. And I was quite impressed actually now with the software that the event organizer was able to send me for people to make their choices of what they wanted to eat, etc. And from that software, it produced a table plan. It produced name cards with what people had chosen, etc. And that software wasn't around when I was there 20 odd years ago, but it just shows you how things have moved on. And that's great, and a great example of how as an industry we've embraced technology.
Yeah, and I think we've got a long way to go yet as well before we've fully realised its potential in that front. But it's exciting times, I think, for sure, on that
Yeah,
front, especially in a moment where we find ourselves a little bit creaking at the seams when it comes to staffing.
yeah,
Let's utilise the tech to add value to the whatever the process is, but let's look at it. And I think hospitality has historically been a little bit slow on the uptake on stuff like that, but I totally think we're getting there now in
yeah.
terms of the need slash desire to take this on.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest, well, I think that's right, and I think we need to be able to articulate what careers are available. And I always give the example of when I was working at the hospitals in Leicester here. You know, you say to somebody hospital, they think doctor, nurse, and everybody thinks that's probably the two careers there. But actually, if you look into the NHS, there's about 360 different career paths,
Yeah.
whether it's in administration or whether it's in the labs. But the example I was used to give was, the hospitals, we had 60 lifts. Yeah. So therefore, we had our own lift engineers, and we also had apprentice lift engineers. Now, nobody would think about going into a hospital and say, well, actually, I'm going to be a lift engineer. But actually, we do employ those people. And equally with hotels, it's the same sort of thing that,
Yeah.
there are careers there that you wouldn't automatically think about.
No, absolutely. And even, in the context of thinking about hospitality's impact on other sectors,
Mm.
And if you work in legal, finance, engineering, whatever, the chances are you still need to have a hospitable approach to what you do in
Yeah.
order to collaborate with other organizations, to just make people feel welcome if you're trying to win a new client in a legal firm or
Yeah.
whatever. And so a lot of the time people I suppose don't really think about the full impact of this sector
Yeah.
on not just its own sector but the world, really.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, and I think that's a message I think that we really need to get across to people.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, this is turning into a debating podcast. Or just well, we're not debating; we're just agreeing with each other, aren't we? That's the long and the short of it. But there's a story I want to kind of touch upon, which I'm assuming must have happened when you were still working within hotels, and it was when you fill out the form. There's one thing I ask: what is the scariest moment or the most terrifying thing that's happened to you? And there was an evacuation that you had
Yeah.
to lead. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I suppose it really goes back to the time that the IRA was bombing London, and I was working in a 400-bedroom hotel in just off Kensington, and we'd had a call come through to say, there was a bomb in the premises. So, the general manager said, "We need to keep people here. We'll stay." The deputy general manager said, "No, I think we ought to evacuate." And of course, then they looked at me, who was the duty manager, to say, "What do you think?"
It's all on you, casting
Yeah,
vote.
yeah, yes. And you suddenly think to yourself, "Oh my God." And of course, it wasn't that long after one of the Hilton hotels had evacuated people and the bomb went off in reception. So you evacuated people into the area. So I think we came to the conclusion that we would stay. We wouldn't evacuate the hotel onto Kensington High Street. And I'll tell you what, that's probably the longest half an hour in my life, just waiting in case there was a bang.
Oh
But
God, I can only imagine.
yeah, as it transpired, nothing happened. It was false. But of course, it wasn't that long after we'd had the bomb explosion at the bandstand just by the Royal Garden. So it was a difficult time for hotels in London in those days.
Yeah. But I think the thing is as well. Like, I mean, this is why I'm kind of always keen as well to not just talk about the funny things that happen, of which there are many, but it is moments like this that I think that you don't know it at the time, but it's building your problem solving capability, your strength of character when it comes to leadership decisions, resilience, all of the things that you can't really go learn in a classroom. You can
No,
only really go
absolutely.
learn by experiencing it. And in the moment it can be scary, but you could probably look back on that and go, well, that taught me a few pretty valuable lessons.
Yes. I think that's right because there's no, you can do as many scenarios as you like, but you're never going to come up with something like that.
No, indeed. And I know equally, you could have a 60-year career in hospitality and you'd still, on the very last day of your career, something could come up that you've never experienced before. It's just the
Yeah,
nature of life, I suppose.
it is, and I've often said to people it is quite strange sometimes because you could be there on a Friday night, trying to throw a drunk out of the bar, and on the Saturday night you could be escorting a member of the royal family to their table at a dinner.
Yeah.
It's that wider spectrum.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you pulled the curtain across on your hotel career. The opportunity within the Chamber of Commerce come up. Did that come up because that was something that you meaningfully went after, or did it just kind of land on your lap a little bit and you went, oh, I could maybe do that?
Well, to be honest, I think as I was saying, when I was general manager of the ground, I did a spell as president of the chamber, so I got very much involved with supporting businesses in the area. And actually, when the post came up, I thought, yeah, I'd like to do that. I 22 good years in hotels, thoroughly enjoyed it. But I suppose looking back, I'd worked 22 Christmas days in a row, 22 New Year's Eves in a row, and I thought, well, actually, maybe it is time to do something different. And somebody once said to me, "Well, how on earth did you go from a hotel general manager to running a chamber of commerce?" And I said, "Well, if you're running a hotel, there's two things you need. You need good organizational skills and you need good communication skills. Now, running a chamber of commerce, we used to do 100 events a year, so you needed good organizational skills, and you're out there representing the local business community. So therefore, you need to be able to communicate to politicians, etc., etc. it. So actually, those two key skills are very transferable.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. And then, I suppose there's also deep within that psyche of wanting to make a difference, there's an opportunity with that role to start making a difference beyond your own four walls, as it were.
Yes, I think that's right. And when I was at the chamber, I also spent 8 years on what's called the East Midlands Regional Assembly, and I was one of the 8 business reps, and I chaired the scrutiny committee there, which oversaw economic development in the East Midlands, and that was really interesting work. But I was able to bring my experience in industry and my experience around the Chamber of Commerce into that particular role. And I'm pleased to say that when I completed that, I was recognised with an OBE, and that was the site that was for services to business and the community of the East Midlands.
Five-star hospitality means having the right people in the right place at the right time, and that's exactly where RotaCloud can help. RotaCloud is the online platform that makes planning rotas, recording attendance, and managing annual leave easy. Its simple, drag-and-drop interface lets you create and share rotas with your team in minutes, while our built-in budgeting tools mean you'll know exactly how much you're spending on staffing before sending the rota out. RotaCloud also makes life easier for your staff, allowing them to check their rotas, request time off, and pick up extra shifts, all through the RotaCloud mobile app. Start your 30-day free trial today by visiting rotacloud.com/Phil and find out how much easier managing your team can be.
But as ever, your family can always bring you down to earth again, because my wife said to me, "Doesn't that stand for other buggers' efforts?"
Do you know, I had a laugh and a giggle with my missus before we did this. I told her that I'm
Yeah,
interviewing you, and you've got an OBE,
yeah,
and we actually, that's something that's widely
yeah,
joked about, isn't it? That it's
yeah.
the O, that's what the O stands for, and M, it's mine in the MBE.
That's right.
I'm pretty sure that that's not the case, but nevertheless, how does that all come about? Does somebody nominate you basically, and then you just get a letter one day and you go, oh my god, I've
Yeah,
been.
yeah.
No,
It's the basically where somebody somewhere within, should we say, establishment puts your name forward. It goes to a vetting committee that's run by the Privy Council, and then if you're deemed suitable, then a letter comes through to you about 3 or 4 weeks before the New Year's honours list, and it's from the Prime Minister, and it basically says the Prime Minister is minded to put your name forward for an OBE. So you're never really quite sure until the list is published as to whether the minded bit actually turned into an actual OBE.
right.
So it is quite an opaque thing, but I do remember that I probably spent 3 to 4 weeks running around saying nice things about Tony Blair, so just to make sure.
Yeah, soon as you got the badge, right, back to normal, back to normal.
Yep, back to normal. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it was a nice recognition. Some of the things you do, because a lot of things you do are probably outside your normal sort of remit. So it's always nice to have something like that.
Yeah, and I think you don't do it for that purpose, right?
No,
But when it comes,
yeah,
it's nice that somebody's kind of acknowledged that you're doing good work.
yeah, and that's the way you have to look at it. And it came as a total surprise, but there you go. It was I was very honoured to have received it.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my letter, to be honest. It's been a few years now, but anyway, one day, who knows?
You never
Um,
know.
I'm just going to go straight for knighthood. I thought, well, let's just let's not go with the OBEs and MBEs, but no, joking, of course. Um, at what point was it that you had your meeting with the king?
Well, it's a funny story, because the king had actually, obviously with the death of Majesty the Queen, taken over, and within about 2 or 3 months, he'd put together a whole series of receptions for various parts of society. And anyway, suddenly this invitation comes through the door for a reception at Buckingham Palace, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I have to say, when the envelope hit the deck, I was quite surprised. It's the closest piece of cardboard I've seen to, or I should say it's the closest to wood I've ever seen, even though it was cardboard. This was a serious invitation.
Right.
So anyway, I thought, oh, crikey. And I thought, well, I probably wasn't overly surprised to have been invited because it was for SMEs and I was holding a role within government. So, in the nicest possible way, I didn't think too much of it. But I thought, right, okay, I was instructed to be, join the queue at 6 o'clock for a 6:30 start. So happily did that. But unfortunately, on the evening, it was absolutely hammering it down with rain, and I was in a queue of about 200 people trying to get
In a
into the
tux.
palace. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it was on the basis that unfortunately there was a two policemen and a torch looking at invitations and your passport. So we were getting, as you can imagine, wetter and wetter. So actually, I probably got to the steps of the palace at about 20 past 6. So I was within time. And I suddenly noticed I had a pink card, whereas the other invitees had a blue card. So I didn't think anything. I thought it was probably a civil service card. Anyway, as I walked up the steps, this woman must have jumped out of a cupboard with a clipboard and said, quick, quick, you're going to be one of the first to be presented to the king. Well, nobody told me any of this.
Right.
So, and I was shocked. So, and I said, well, can I take my coat off? And she said, yes, yes, come with me. So we whisked past all these people in the queue, and my coat was just about thrown over the desk. And then I was whisked up to a private room. Anyway, I stood there and I saw my colleague, Liz Barclay, who was she's small business commissioner. She works over Department of Business. Anyway, she'd had a similar experience to me. And anyway, we were sort of stood there, and in comes the king. And he comes over to me and he sees on my badge, small business crown representative. So the first thing he says to me, oh, are you on the staff? And I said, well, no, not directly, sir. So I then explained what my role. I must have had a good 5-minute conversation with him. So he's just about to move down to my colleague Liz Barclay, and this is what the importance of the rain. She'd had exactly the same experience with me, and she suddenly looked at him. She said, "Oh my God, I've still got my trainers on."
Oh, nice.
Because she had the nice shoes in the bag, which of course were thrown over the counter. So I
Yeah.
said, just look at him directly, you won't notice.
Yeah.
But it was quite surreal actually, because I said it was totally and utterly unexpected. But I have to say, he's very, very easy to talk to. Now I've been very fortunate. I've been presented to the Queen 3 times. I can tell you now, the late Queen. Every time I was terrified. But you don't have that with him. He's very relaxing, very chatty, and everything else. So it was an incredible experience, I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, God rest her and all of that kind of thing, but she always had a pretty,
Yeah,
nothing was revealed from the face,
no,
basically, in terms of her mood in that moment, it seemed.
but it's. I think the problem was when you're in that scenario, you have the ability to turn into Uriah Heep and be ever so humble.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great stuff. Let's talk about Cabinet Office,
Yeah,
because it's not many. Well, I've not had anybody. I mean, I've spoken to Viscount Thurzo on the
yes,
show.
yes.
He's the only other person I think that's touched Parliament in some way in his time that I've had on the show. So was that a role that kind of somebody said, "Oh, you should go for that," and you went, "Oh, never really kind of gave it much thought," or how did it come about?
Well, I think I think it is very much somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Have you seen this role at the Cabinet Office? We really think you could do it based on your experience." So I went through a process. I think 70 people applied. They interviewed 10 of us, and it was deemed that that out of the 10, that was probably the best fit for it. So which was good. And again, it was quite strange how it all came about, but I was very much charged with a couple of things. One was to try and work with government departments and arm's length bodies to try and open up public sector procurement to small businesses. Now, if you look at it in central government, they spend about 60 billion a year on goods and services. And the government's aspiration at the time was that for every £3 central government spent on goods and services, they wanted £1 spent with SMEs, either directly or indirectly. But if you look at the wider public sector, and this is, local government, the money sent to fire, police, devolved, etc. It's about 300 billion a year on goods and services. So actually, there's a lot of opportunities for small businesses to pitch for that type of work. But inevitably, doing business with the public sector is very different from doing it with the commercial sector, and we will always ask more questions than you would probably see in a normal pre-qualification questionnaire for a tender. That's the reality of it. But we can do it in a way that is simpler. It's got to be in plain English, etc., etc. So there was lots of work to do to try and simplify it and make it easier, because when you're a small business and somebody sends you one of these pre-qualification questionnaires, which is about 50 pages, somebody look at it and say, have I got the time to read it, let alone understand it? So
Yeah.
it was trying to get rid of some of that bureaucracy to make it easier. So that was very much my sort of task. I got somewhat derailed when COVID came, because I ended up, as did a lot of my colleagues, doing frontline business support. But having, run a Chamber of Commerce where we did have the Business Link service, it was nothing that I couldn't do, but it just meant that ended up being the focus during COVID. But once we got out of the COVID situation, we then put a bill before Parliament for what's described as the procurement bill, which then became the Procurement Act. And this was about liberalising public sector procurement in the UK. Now, it was very much on the basis that we were out of the EU. So therefore, though we transposed all regulations into UK law, this was an opportunity to liberalise what we were doing and make it a lot simpler. So there was then a 3-year journey of taking a bill through Parliament. And I always laugh at people. I said one of my 4 A levels was British Constitution. What I
Really?
hadn't realised it was going to be 40 years before I actually used any of that
Yeah.
knowledge. But I have to say, taking a bill through Parliament is quite fascinating, actually, and the
I
way
can
it sort of
only
works.
imagine.
Yeah, and interestingly, in the last Queen's speech, there were 39 different bills. So there wasn't enough time in the House of Commons to be able to take the procurement bill in that direction. So we made a decision to take it through the House of Lords first. And that was really interesting, because whatever one might think about the democratic deficit, there's an awful lot of people in that chamber that have got a lot of experience and understanding. When we took it through what's called the second reading, there were about 28 peers that spoke on the bill, but none of it was political. It was all on the basis of people that had experience in public sector procurement, knew how it worked both sides, etc. So as a result of that, I think we got a better piece of legislation, because the people that inputted at that stage actually knew about procurement, as opposed to standing at the dispatch box making political jibes.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that is a process that probably for the vast majority of people who might be listening to this, and the vast majority of people in the world, really, that probably don't fully understand, if you want to make a change, the process that you have to go through to make a change in politics. And that's when I think people get irate at politics, because it slows the process down. But I suppose what you're talking about here is actually trying to speed the process up, really,
Yeah.
and take
Well,
away a lot of the roadblocks as to why somebody might want to do business with central government in the first place.
yeah, and I think that's and people often forget that bit. Often people think, well, you put an act of parliament through and everything else, and you're putting barriers in the way. This bill was about liberalising. It was about taking barriers away. So, but again, I think the good thing about the political system we have, there is obviously scrutiny of it, but where you have a situation where you've got someone like the House of Lords with a lot of people experience, they can actually add value to it based on what they've done. And that I think, you come out with a better piece of legislation as a result of that. And I think that then makes the real difference. Now, it's the old sort of thing, and any minister will tell you, if you start rushing bills through Parliament for whatever reason, you very often come out with something that has all sorts of unintended consequences. So I think this one was very much thought through. What can we do? How can we make it easier? And and as I always say to people, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for small businesses, but government obviously is still the custodian of the public pound. So therefore, we have to make sure that the what is spent correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I think as well that whole process of trying to, I suppose, rip something apart and figure out a better way of doing things
Yeah,
is probably the culmination of years and years and years of adding something to a process because it felt in the moment like it was the right thing
yeah,
to do. And 20 years later, you end up with this, serious amount of red tape, even if you're talking about a 50-page document. Like, as you say, most small businesses are going to go, forget it.
yeah,
I haven't got the scope or capacity to get involved in that. And actually, a lot of the time, that's happened. The complication has happened just because of it's a culmination of different ideas
yeah,
over time. And
yeah.
sometimes the way to do it is to effectively. I remember that this is actually something that I did once in my career, where I worked for a company in the contract catering sector, and at the end of every month, there was a monumental amount of paperwork that had to go off to head office to get looked at and all of that. And one month, I decided I wasn't going to send any of it,
Yeah.
and then see what people would come back and say when they say, "Oh, where's your X? Where's your Y?"
Mm.
And over the course of the time, I think I had to resubmit 50% of the original stuff. Never
Mm.
got any course to send the other stuff through.
Yeah,
I'm not
that
suggesting for a second I was right in doing that, but
no.
it was quite an eye opener.
Well, I think that goes back to my sort of work at the Regulatory Policy Committee. Often you end up doing these things for the sake of it. And I always remember a colleague of mine that she used to do lean management. And anyway, she'd gone into this particular hospital. And while she was there, she noticed that there was a blue book on the reception desk. And she noted people used to come in and sign it and all the rest of it. And she thought, well, what's this blue book for? Just out of interest. And the receptionist said, well, I don't know. She said, well, what happens to the blue book? Well, when it's full, we send it down to accounts, and accounts give us a new one. So she thought, oh, okay. So she went down to accounts and she said to the lady there, well, what happens with these blue books? She said, well, they go up on the shelf up there. And she said, and when the shelf's full, we get a box and we put it in the store. And she said, okay. So she eventually found out what the book was for. Now, the hospital was built in 1947. And in those days, we had petrol rationing. So if you came into work on a bike, you signed the book. And at the end of a certain period, you got an extra petrol ration. But of course, they'd put it in, but nobody had ever taken it out.
Right? Yeah,
And there are so many examples of things like that in the pubs that we ask the same questions, we do all the same thing, but nobody does anything with it.
yeah, yeah. And that's probably one of the maybe the frustrations of the public with their external eyes looking at the public sector. Is that they just look and think that there's wastage everywhere.
Mm,
Wherever you look at, there's a process, and nobody really knows why that process should exist, but it does.
yeah,
But it's a big thing to unpick. That's the thing, though, isn't it? When it's
yeah.
deep rooted in a lot of people's lives.
Yes, and I think that's right, and I always regard it as very very similar. Oh, the reason we can't do it is because of health and safety. Well, 9 times out of 10, it's not the case. It's just someone that doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So it is a case of looking at it, why are we doing it, etc., etc. And that was the thing that we did with the Regulatory Policy Committee and the government's agenda to reduce, the legislative burden in those days. And again, I think if I remember rightly, we got rid of the best part of 3,000 regulations. Now, it's probably fair to say there was lots of low-hanging fruit there, but we were able to get rid of some of these things because they were no longer needed. But once you've done that, getting rid of some of the other bits is a lot harder because often a lot of it's there for a very good reason.
Absolutely. Can't let our time pass without talking about the IOH, because you obviously have gotten involved in that post your time in cabinet. How did that come about?
Well, it's I've been a member of the IOH for well over 40 years. When I was at college, I used to be what was then the HCMI's rep for FE in the South Wales. So,
Right, you're definitely
so
aging
I
yourself
probably
now.
yeah, I'm afraid I am. But I got involved a couple of years ago when I ended up talking with Robert, because the IOH is very very keen now to get what's called chartered status, and this is all about the agenda now of professionalising the industry, changing perceptions, and everything else. But obviously, with my being a member, but also with my experience within central government, was to try and help them through this particular process. So I was very much drafted in to try and help on that, and again, I've been working with Robert on this for some time. And again, as part of that, I was invited to join the supervisory board and became chairman last, I think it was August. So
Yeah.
it was, which was very nice. It's as my wife often says to me, your problem is you can't run fast enough. But on a serious note, I'm delighted to have been invited to be chairman, and I think I can actually help with the chartered status, and look forward to use what experience I have in working in central government to get us over the line, and also to work with Robert and the team to help change this image we have about UK hospitality, and actually to promote this now as as a career, and improve the image accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, a great message, and I think you're kind of almost a case in point as well, in terms of your own career of that message, in the sense that, yes, hospitality was where you got your start, 20 odd years in hospitality front and center, but that's taken you into other avenues that have allowed you to take that skill set that you learned in the industry and utilize it in other sectors, and now kind of, I suppose, almost full circle, the opportunity to really leave a mark. I mean, if we can achieve chartered status,
Yeah,
to me it feels like a game changer,
yeah,
in the sense of the overall perception that people might look at it and go, didn't
yeah,
really think of
exactly.
it as that kind of professional body.
Yeah, and I think that's where we've got to get to, because I think there's lots of things we've got to do to change people's perception of hospitality. But I think chartered status would be an important step forward, and I think it just then becomes we get it into the realms of being a profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast will continue to try and shine a light on all the great people that work within the industry, to kind of highlight, what an amazing career you can have in here, and, see things that you might not have ever thought possible. If you look back to your 18-year-old self, would you have even imagined that you would have gone into the cabinet office at some point, met the Queen 3 times, met the King, all of these things that just kind of, you think, wow. I'm guessing you look back and go, God, how did that happen?
I think you're probably right. Certainly at 18, I think, like a lot of young people at that age, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. If someone had said, well, this is what it's going to map out like, I'd never have believed them.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. There's always an argument about right place, right time and everything else. And I would be the first person to say I didn't have a grand plan. Though I enjoy working in hotels. I always wanted to be a general manager. I was a general manager, and then something else comes along, and I took it, etc. But I certainly, didn't have a grand plan that looked anything like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that thing about right place, right time, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of that, but you've also got to have your eyes open to the fact that if you are in the right place at the right time, it still takes you to make that step into
Yeah,
whatever it is that has been presented to
yeah,
you. If you'd have said no to the Chamber of Commerce,
yeah,
you don't go into the cabinet office probably.
exactly. Sometimes some of these things are a leap of faith, but you just have to believe in yourself and say, well, actually, can I do this? Can I make a difference? And if the answer to that is yes, you should go for it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what a wonderful way to summarize an end, really. Martin, it's been great to spend some time with you, and I wish you and the IOH all the very best in getting that chartered status over the line. Are you allowed to reveal the latest state of play with that, or is that a
Um,
bit behind closed doors?
No, we've had various conversations with the Privy Council, and they've been very helpful in guiding us to some of the bits that we probably need to brush up on or improve. So it's an ongoing process, but we need to get to a position where we've got a top rate application before it then goes to the King.
Yeah. Well, my feeling is that he's a massive advocate of this
Mm,
industry.
yeah,
So my hope is that when that happens, is that he'll just get his stamp and go, yep, there you go. However it works, get his
yeah.
melted wax or whatever. I don't know. And yeah, because he certainly outwardly he seems to be a fan of hospitality. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. We should certainly do everything we can to help.
Fantastic. Martin, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, and wish you all the very best with the next phase of of your career.
Yeah.
You're still in it. You're still doing it.
Absolutely. Well,
man.
thank you, Phil. Good to catch up.
Thanks very much. Take care. And there we have it. Martin demonstrating that hospitality really can take you anywhere. Just get going, work hard, and be alert to opportunity, and who knows where you end up. This week, I've got a cheeky bonus for you on Friday, so I hope you'll tune in for that. So until then, have a cracking week.